Welcome to the BuiltOnAir podcast, the variety show for all things Airtable. In each episode, we cover 4 different segments. It's always fresh and different, and lots of fun while you get the insider info on all things Airtable. Our hosts and guests are some of the most senior experts in the Airtable community. Join us live each week on our YouTube channel every Tuesday at 11 a.m. Eastern, and join our active community at BuiltOnAir.com. Before we begin, a word from our sponsor, On2Air Backups. On2Air Backups provides automated Airtable backups to your cloud storage for secure and reliable data protection. Prevent data loss and set up a secure Airtable backup system with On2Air Backups at On2Air.com. As one customer, Sarah, said, having automated Airtable backups has freed up hours of my time every other week and the fear of losing anything. Longtime customer David states, On2Air Backups might be the most critical piece of the puzzle to guard against unforeseeable disaster. It's easy to set up, and it just works. Join Sarah, David, and hundreds more Airtable users like you to protect your Airtable data with On2Air Backups. Sign up today with promo code BuiltOnAir for a 10% discount. Check them out at On2Air.com. And now let's check out today's episode and see what we built on air.
All right, welcome back into the BuiltOnAir podcast. Good to be back with everybody. Ali, Camille, and myself, Dan, back with you. Talk about all things Airtable and keep you up to date on all the latest and greatest functionality and features. Today, we're doing another deep dive into specific functionality around sandboxes and how those work. So Camille's going to walk us through that. Before we jump into that, I was going to show, let me share my screen. And so yeah, on the what's new, there was a couple things added in April. I don't know how new these are, but they're at least announcing custom elements. Did anything change with this, or is this just finally announcing this functionality?
I think it's a formal release.
Gotcha.
Yeah. And now when you go, at least this is what I was about to bring up, is now when you go to create a new interface page, that's like right at the top. What I still find frustrating is this will create an element on a dashboard only. Like that, you can't drive where that will land. And it seems to kind of just pick the first dashboard or create a new one if you don't already have one. But then you can take that code and get it into you can copy it and paste it into a different screen. But like to get to an actual full page custom interface, the only way I've figured out how to do that is to like start from the data layer and open Omni and ask it to create a custom interface. I can't do it in another way unless anyone has suggestions.
So when you do this, it doesn't create a full custom layout, it creates a dashboard?
It creates a dashboard element. So you can like a number, you know how like there's numbers, charts, lists on a dashboard layout. That's where this will land. At least a few times I've tried it.
Interesting.
If you don't use Omni, you can create a full page custom extension by clicking the custom option, but that requires that you code it yourself.
Right, because every time I do that, it's like you don't have any custom extensions, and then I have not even figured out how to get beyond that screen of like, is that when you have to like connect the SDK somehow on a different end?
Yeah, you have to have it installed on your whatever machine you're on. You should be able to create new from there, and if not, that's interesting user experience. There's a lot about custom extensions for interfaces that don't feel connected. Like Ali just said, if Omni creates it for you, it's not necessarily counted as your custom extension. So the next time you try to add it, it's not going to recognize that it exists. You have to copy and paste the code from one place to another. So you have two different methods of reusing a custom extension for interfaces, and they're not at all connected. And then the first option that they're talking about here, creating a dashboard element and not a full page custom extension, is also an interesting choice.
Yeah. Okay. That's interesting. Okay. Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, I have found reasons for liking the dashboard element, because then I can have it next to, other native pieces, so that like, not only just for checking the data, like making sure that the code it wrote is pulling the right stuff, but I don't know. I often then move it to a full page after I've done all that, but we'll see.
Yeah. All right. There's another one. They've been talking a lot about their MCP connector. So they released a new MCP a little while ago, and now they have it integrated directly into Claude. So you can add it directly into your Claude client and use. So that's kind of cool. I don't really use this approach. I have done a lot of like Claude scripting with Airtable, but if you give it, like, Claude already knows the API for Airtable, and so I just have it write, scripts that just use the API directly. I haven't really found a need to go through the MCP approach. It kind of adds an extra layer of abstraction and complexity that I don't think is fully necessary. So I don't know.
The only reason,
also writing scripts and codes and stuff. So in my world, it's not as needed.
I have not used it yet. The more I get into writing code with Claude, the more I'm thinking about where I would use this is just so that it can easily reference my schema as I'm talking about the things I want to change. Because often, like, I'll say, oh, I want to add this, and then it has to come back and ask me for the field IDs so that I can write the code correctly. But if it just knew them, that would be good. But I've had clients and colleagues talk about great success using this to like get an overview on their entire workspace and like ask it to find like where they have like holes in their data structure and what they can improve and optimize. And they said they were blown away. So that could be cool.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, I could see that. Where it'd be interesting, I'm really curious to see how Airtable approaches the whole AI movement, because the MCP is still limited by what the API can do. And so I'm hopeful that this whole push for AI and MCPs pushes Airtable to enhance their API to allow for more interaction, more access.
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right, last one. Looks like a little bit of love given to the admin panel users, some just kind of UI improvements. So.
Yeah, if you're in a large enterprise, the loading the users page was painful. It's less painful now, which is good. If you go back to the previous screenshot, they basically paginated the response, which is different from how they're paginating bases. I feel like this is the more standard approach of just give you literal pages and you can define, show me 50 at a time or 100 or 250 or whatever. Whereas if you were looking at a particularly large view in a base, it's like, well, here's 1,000 of those records. Hopefully it's the ones that you're looking for, unless you want to view all of them. There's no happy medium. So I'm wondering if this is kind of like them testing the waters of here's some pagination for a large data set of some kind. Other than what is kind of shown here, there's like minor tweaks, like they've organized the sidebar for navigation in the admin panel, but nothing in the way of like new features necessarily.
Yeah. That's good. They are thinking about the admin panel. All right. With that, Close that. Okay, Camille, put your screen on. There you go.
Yeah, so we're going to talk about Sandboxes, which is a somewhat newer feature for Airtable. It has been released for a little bit, and it was in an extended beta for a while before that. But it's not as, I don't know, I don't really hear too many people talking about Sandbox all that much, even though it is, it's a useful feature, but it does have, I would say, quite a lot of gotchas. Sandbox is available for business and enterprise scale plans, so you can't have it on any lower of a plan. But the general idea of a sandbox is I want to make some changes to the schema, the automations, the interfaces, the forms of this base, but other people are in it. So if I start deleting columns and adding new tables and really adjusting some foundational things about this base, I'm going to ruin a lot of people's days. So the idea of turning on a sandbox is I can enable this other layer, thinking of it as a draft mode, or if you're familiar with traditional development, it's a lower form of Git where you open a branch and you start drafting all of the changes that you want to make. And when you're ready, there's a publish button to publish all of your changes to the normal base, which they call production. So how do you create a sandbox? Really simple. You click on the name of the base. If you're on business or enterprise, you should see the sandbox section. It's going to explain to you what the sandbox is. I'm going to go ahead and create a sandbox. Depending on how large the base is, this might take, a minute, couple minutes. You see, I got briefly that message that said this is taking longer than expected. So I'm going to get an unnecessary email saying that it's ready. I see that it's ready. Visually, not too much has changed. It's going to tell me that, hey, there is a sandbox for this space. There was that pop-up in the top right, but there's now this switch between production and sandbox. There are certain features that are immediately disabled from me making any adjustments to in the production view, which is where I am right now. So if I double click description, for example, I can't change anything about this field. I can't rename it, can't add a description, can't change its field type, can't do that. I can modify views, so I can hide and show columns, I can filter, I can create new views. So I'm just going to quickly create a new personal view. You'll notice that locked view is missing. That's basically because that is considered a schema change. So Airtable is saying you can create a locked view, but only if you're in the sandbox. So I'm going to say KP, this is a personal view, and you'll see why I'm making example views in a second. And I'm going to create a locked view preemptively. Regular collaborator view, and I'm going to lock it once I get to the sandbox. If I go to automations, similar to making schema changes, this tooltip says I don't have permission to switch it on. What it really means is that Sandbox is active, which means if I want to turn this on, I have to go to Sandbox, turn it on, and publish that change. I can test automations. So if you need to manually run something, you can still do as you've done before and pick test records, or you could test the whole thing at once as long as there's not a loop in it. That still works as expected. If I go to interfaces, I don't believe I published any. Oh, wait, no, I did. The UI is just weird. I always forget that. Interfaces will behave the way that you expect them to, but you can't edit them directly. Of course, you must edit them in the sandbox. Same thing with forms. So I'm going to go back to the data layer, and I'm going to switch to Sandbox. Now, what happens when you're in a sandbox? First of all I did was switch the toggle. If you have a larger base, this might take a little bit longer to switch back and forth. I haven't noticed it being that bad, to be honest, for even large bases that have a sandbox active. I have this sidebar that comes up that says sandbox changes. As I start making adjustments here, it's going to keep track of what those adjustments are so that when I'm ready to publish these changes, I can submit them all or just submit the ones that I'm ready to publish at a given time. Similar to publishing changes to an interface, but you'll see it's a little bit more detailed. So I'm going to get rid of this because I know I've already used this before. Something that I want to make very clear, when you first create a sandbox, it's basically duplicating the base. So all of the IDs that are related to this base are the exact same, which is great for scripting, except for the base ID. The sandbox has a different base ID than the production base ID, but the table IDs, view IDs, field IDs, even record IDs are exactly the same at the point that you make a duplication. That's true of basically any method of duplicating a base. The difference is if I go in and I add a brand new field, and I publish this change, production is going to have the same field ID for this. That is not true if I just duplicated a base. The new field in base A and base B would have different field IDs. They have the same field ID in Sandbox. So solid choice there. It keeps things consistent from a schema perspective. But when it's duplicating the base at, when you enable Sandbox, it does not keep your records in sync. And in fact, Sandbox does not consider changing records to be a change that can be published. So if I go in and I delete 2 of these records in this table and I review my changes, Airtable is going to think real hard about what I've done. And it's going to say, well, you added a new field and there's no reference to the data. This is a completely separate set of data. It's the schema, the automations, and the interfaces that are being carried over. Nothing about the data. That is a specific weakness that we'll talk about later. Right now, I'm just giving a high-level overview of what even is Sandbox. But there are very specific gotchas that are unique to Sandbox that you wouldn't find in some other standard methods of drafting development. So I can do other things, like I can turn this automation on. I can say, rename an existing automation. I could go into my interfaces, and this is where stacking changes starts to get a little confusing because interfaces still have a published section, which is a layer before you publish the changes out of Sandbox. So if I wanted to go to this page, for example, and I said, I don't need this whole section of this interface anymore, I have to delete that. And then I have to publish the change to the interface like normal, but then I have to go back to the data and then review the changes and then publish that change to production. So you're publishing twice for interfaces, and it's the same thing for forms. So this pop-up is letting me know that now that I have a couple more changes in my review changes panel, I don't have to publish all of these changes at once. I can pick and choose which changes I want to submit. And all of these changes were done today, but if this were a longer development period, it would be grouped by the day that the changes were made. So if you happen to know, I was working on stuff earlier in the week, Monday, all of that stuff is ready, but the changes I made today, not quite ready, you can select everything that was in Monday. You can also filter. I'm just going to click through this so I can click. You can also filter by who made the change. So if there were multiple people in this base making adjustments, I can say, well, I know my stuff is ready. Just show me my changes and I'll publish those, and I'll leave everyone else's changes here until they're ready to publish. Something to note, A lot of pieces of Airtable can have overlapping changes. Like if I delete a section on that interface page and Allie goes in and adds a section of that interface page, it's only one publish. So I can't publish my things without also publishing Allie's change to that interface. That is different from some other adjustments, like if I go to automations earlier, I'm just going to close that. I renamed this automation to just cool, but I can also add a new step to the automation. And if I go back here, what it should do, it counts those as separate changes. So sometimes you can be very selective about what piece of this change is being published at any given time, but other times, mostly with interfaces, you have to publish all of the changes at once. So I could say the only thing I want to do is rename that automation to cool. So I just click that checkbox. I'm applying one change. The number of changes that you make is going to affect how long this process takes. It is now done. So if I do view applied changes, it's just a summary of whatever you did that just got pushed. I'm going to go back to production, and those records that I deleted are still here in production. Again, record information does not change from Sandbox to production. If I go to my automations, that create record step is not there, but the automation is renamed to cool. So pausing there, any questions or comments?
Awesome so far. One question I just thought of is if you had created 2 steps in that automation, 2 new steps, or done, edited one and created a new one, would that still appear as just one change, edited actions in this automation?
It would.
Okay.
So from memory, the changes to an automation that are separate are renaming / updating the description. So I'm just going to keep editing the same one to see like all of the changes together. Edit description, test. The trigger is a separate thing. So if I just add a couple more days, and then this was already there of create a new record, but I'm going to delete this action here. So now if I look at my review changes, edit actions and edit trigger are different. It doesn't seem to recognize that I've updated the description, although that might be hidden in either of those. So we've come across our first gotcha. Mm-hmm. How do I not publish it being redescribed as test? I don't know. And there's also no real undo. You can't like click on this change and be like, actually get rid of that, revert it back to production. The only real way to revert this back to production is to delete the sandbox and start over. So since I just mentioned that, how do you do it? You can go to this drop down. If you're in Sandbox, you could go and delete Sandbox. And what that will do is it will kick you out and say that Sandbox is no longer available. The changes that I didn't publish are lost to the sands of time. Sometimes that is a good thing if you've made a critical error in the sandbox and you're like, I don't want that to carry over at all. So it's still named cool because that's the one thing that I did publish, but the other changes to this automation were not done. And the interface is going to be the same before I touched it. If I ever want a sandbox again, I would go in and I would create a sandbox. It's going to do so. That sandbox is going to have a different base ID than the original sandbox. It's always going to be a different base ID. So if you have environment variables for your make configurations or for your coding projects, you're going to have to keep updating the sandbox ID. So I'm back in Sandbox. Now it's a kind of fresh install. You'll notice it recopied all of the records. So I'm back to 5 at this table. I think originally I deleted 3 and 4. Something to note, about like what are the differences between how I would make changes in Airtable if there's a sandbox active versus there's not. There's certain things that I would not recommend you make part of your configuration. So I'm going to go, I don't know, maybe tasks as an example. Here's what I wouldn't say. I would say, well, actually, I want to go somewhere else. Everything is linked to the same event, but maybe that's a good thing. Here's what I don't necessarily want to do. I don't want to have like anything in Airtable that is specifically looking at an exact record. And I'll explain why in a second. So if I say you could link to an event, attendees can link to events, but only if that event, let's see, if that task has any of one of these, I would not recommend you do that. What this is doing is saying only let them link if that thing is associated with this exact record, because remember, the data in Sandbox is copied at the time that you turn on the Sandbox. And from that point forward, the record IDs are not guaranteed to match between production and Sandbox. So if I went in, I'm going to cancel out of that. If I went and said, brand new task, that task does not exist in production and it never will. So if I go back and try and do what I did before, only link where task has any of brand new task, I'm going to save. It's exactly what I want. I'm going to review my changes. I'm going to apply these changes. Airtable is not going to warn me that the condition I've just set is impossible. So I should never be able to link to another event again. So I'm going to click done. I'm going to close out of here and I'm going to go to production. What is helpful, while I'm about to be negative, what is helpful is that it knows to send you back to the same view and table back and forth between production and Sandbox. So that's nice. But if I create a brand new attendee, it's impossible for me to link to a record.
The warning in the field.
No, it has no way of knowing that it's hidden condition. So if you look, it's going to act as though it's a task that was deleted. So that's not necessarily an error from Airtable's perspective, but you've now crippled your base. And there's no indication, if I go back to Sandbox, there's no indication, I think I was in the task table, that these records exist in production, but this one doesn't. You would just have to know that. And that's not something you're not going to keep track of that for every table, for every record. You're simply not going to do that.
That's wild.
It's a good idea, but there's specific things that you simply cannot do that. So what I would recommend instead is I would say events have tasks. I would say, I don't know, maybe it's all determined by task type. I would say if you want to do what I was doing before, limit that selection down, not by the specific task, but that task type is something that is concrete, like a single select option, because those are the same and those carry over. So if I do this, now it's no longer strictly impossible. So a lot of times when I'm using that feature of like only allow selection if the selection is a specific record, it comes up more often actually in automations where I have like a conditional step based on a specific linked record value. I just find that I'm often able to associate the records with like a single select option, or sometimes it's like a utility checkbox field that only I can edit that says, yeah, this is this one special record that gets special treatment or whatever. all of that to say, it's one of those very specific gotchas that oftentimes trips me up. But what is still available if I go back and I do tasks, if I change this to dynamic and say, I don't have any options here, but say tasks that are relevant to this attendee, that is still fine to do. Relative choices, dynamic choices are still fine. It's specifying a specific record that doesn't necessarily exist in production in Sandbox.
Right.
I mean, that's probably good practice to avoid in general too. Just like, I mean, I do it all the time, but I think about it now, and as I'm doing it, I'm like, ooh, if somebody ever accidentally deletes this record or like whatever, then things are just going to be broken. So I think it's smarter to do it the way that Camille was just describing, by using an ancillary field in some other way, rather than relying on a specific record and record ID.
Yeah. You're going to run into some headaches anyway, doing it the first way around, but this, saves you a little bit of headache that is Sandbox specific. So it's really like the first, and to me, one of the most major things it's not as obvious, but something that is very unfortunate, at least to me, is how syncing behavior works with a Sandbox. So right now, I don't have any synced tables in this space right now. And again, the idea of having a Sandbox where the data isn't necessarily one-to-one into production is that I can make test records. So this is an event planning base. I can test out the sign up form and send it out to all of my friends and have it fill in this fake place and not pollute my real list of attendees. That's a good thing. But when you have a synced view in Sandbox, even if the synced view is coming from a base that also has a Sandbox, you're going to be looking at production data no matter what. That's a little harder to conceptualize. So I'm going to attempt to quickly spin up a synced view to sort of make this make sense. So let's see how quickly Airtable is going to let me create, actually. In the meantime, any other questions or questions? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So in a normal base, if you're in an automation and you're updating a single select field with a value that's not in the dropdown, it automatically creates it for you. But now in a Sandbox, you can't modify that list in the production. Would it still allow you to automatically create a new value?
Nope. So if I'm going to throw together an example just so people can see. When matches conditions, which has a single select attendees. When your name contains X, we're going to update that same record, attendees, and we're going to say the attendee category is test, an option that is not there. And I'm going to turn this on, and I'm going to publish. Oh, this is also something that I didn't necessarily show before. I created a new automation and I turned it on. If I say, we'll turn on the automation, it has to also create the automation. So Airtable Sandbox changes sidebar is pretty good at recognizing all of the dependent changes that also must be published in order to publish what you want. So it's got this little icon in the bottom right corner that says this is a dependent change. You have to have the automation exist for me to turn it on. So I'm going to apply those two changes. It's a lot of saving changes and going back, but this is a very light base, so it doesn't take too long. And And then I believe, okay.
It worked.
No, I'm in Sandbox. No, okay, so I have to, hold on. Test 2. I was about to say, I was like, oh, they fixed it. Amazing.
For production, that test won't be there, will it? Well, now it will be.
Well, you know what? No, because the configuration hasn't been published yet. So that's a good point. If I go back and if I look, oh man, it doesn't let you scroll. I'm expecting this to fail.
Okay.
Oh my God, it worked. Did they fix it? Because this is something that was like legitimately a problem for me. So let me
publish.
Yeah, it now does test 2, which is still not an option yet. So I'm going to publish, and I'm going to remember to go back to production and try this again in production. Okay, cool. Production. And we're going to make a new one.
Wait,
X.
Huh. I was going to say, yeah, before you create the X, see if it's in the dropdown if you select.
It shouldn't be. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a brand new select field, or you know what? No, I'm going to delete all of these options just so we can see.
Oh,
first of all, test. This is what it is. If you,
uh-oh,
we lost her.
Camille, you're on mute. I don't know if you.
Now you're back. But you're on mute. There you are.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Can you hear me? Okay. If you create the option in production and not Sandbox, Sandbox doesn't recognize it as a option. So if I go in and call this test 2, that is not the same test 2 that's in production. So if I hit save and I hit confirm, and then I'm going to refresh so it recognizes. Okay, and then we're going to go to production, and then we're going to look at this field. There are 2 tests and 2 test 2s. And the reason is test and test 2, one set of those came from Sandbox that were published down. And then another set were created in production by force, basically from the automation. Because the change happened in production, Sandbox has no knowledge of them. So production has a different list of single select options than Sandbox does. And since Sandbox is the way you edit this, I can't get rid of these. The only way to do that is to delete the Sandbox. So this is loose and free. Delete the ones I don't need anymore, and then turn Sandbox on.
Yeah.
How does this affect like adding via the scripting extension, adding new options? Does that just fail?
It doesn't fail. It would do the same thing.
Okay, I would do that. Okay.
Well, I actually don't know, because automations is acting as as the system adding a new option versus the scripting extension is acting as you. So it might recognize that you do not have permissions to create new options. So yeah, this one's a doozy, because which test 2 is correct? I don't know.
Right?
Yeah.
They have different IDs under the hood.
Do they start the same?
What do you mean?
Like just
Yes.
They still in the Sandbox, they still have the same prefix. Yeah.
They do.
Okay. Interesting. Wild.
Yeah, it's that's my other complaint. The one I'll go back to now, though, is synced tables. Synced tables in general. This is more relevant, I think, if you're syncing Airtable to Airtable. But this is also true if you're syncing Salesforce to Airtable, for example. I'm going to sync from here. And then something that is a little bit different. If I didn't have the sandbox on, I could say sync all of the fields, no matter what, that are in this view. But if I go and add a new field in the original view, it would automatically add the same field synced down into this table. When you have sandbox on, you have to manually say, add these fields to this table. It's not going to automatically update as it would without the sandbox. So I'm going to do that. I'm syncing the base that I'm syncing from. Let me just move that to this window. Can you guys see this ABC?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm syncing from there to there. If I were to turn a sandbox on in here, I cannot sync sandbox data anywhere. So instead of this being one ABC, maybe I want this to be 1, 2, 3. And ideally, in like traditional development, you would have a lower environment, a dev or a UAT or something, where if I'm looking at the sandbox of event planning, I want to look at the sandbox data from sync source. I cannot do that. I'm always looking at the production data, whether I'm in sandbox or production, from the sync source. So if you're trying to line things up, this is actually not possible. So another reason why you can't say pick specific records to be the basis of like your link conditions or your automations, because these records will exist in both sandbox and production. But if you're testing the flow from base to base, they're not going to exist here, or they're not necessarily going to exist here. These are different records. So it's very, this one I think it causes me the most headache, just because the enterprise that I'm in, we have so many bases that are so tightly connected together. And if you want to test that connection, you just got to hope. You hope and pray that you set it up right, because you can't test really the flow from this base to this base from a sandbox perspective.
Right.
You change, let's see. Can you change the source view, or, you know, can you switch it to a different? Okay. Yeah. Change source. Okay.
It's going to force you to be from the same table. Also, you'll notice I can't add another source. Multi-source syncing is disabled. If I didn't have a sandbox and made a synced table and added 2, 3, 4 more syncs to this same table, and then turn on the sandbox, it would remain, but I wouldn't be able to add more syncs on top of it.
Okay.
Right.
Interesting.
What about in production? You don't even have the option to change? Because I was thinking, could you have one view go to the sandbox and then a different, sync view and the same table go to production?
Wouldn't that be nice? And no, you can't do that. There is a workaround that I've been testing with using managed apps, where you can have 2 different managed apps and deploy an instance of both of them, and have those sync to each other, and then deploy a different set. So you have like one set is your lower environment and one set is your production environment. You're able to pair those up and have their syncs flow between each other. You can't do that with Sandbox. That's harder to explain, but I don't have managed apps is only for enterprise, and so I wouldn't be able to necessarily demo that on the show. But what we're looking at now is I'm now in production, and this is that synced table. What's annoying to me, I can't see the sync source. Oftentimes, I don't want to make any changes. I just want to click on the shortcut that would take me to the sync source. Right. Can't do that. You have to go into Sandbox and then click it so you can see where it's coming from. You can force the manual sync, though. That is still there.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. How do sandboxes play with managed components or managed apps? Can you have an instance of a managed app and then take a sandbox of that?
Yes, you can.
Okay. Interesting.
So if you're familiar with managed apps or managed components, you make changes in what's called a development base. The development base cannot have a sandbox because it is the sandbox, more or less. But once you deploy it somewhere, wherever you've deployed it, that thing can have a sandbox.
Okay. I have a question that's very specific, but I think has broad impact. And something that I've worried about with like doing something like how we were talking last week about how easy it is to like accidentally trigger a million emails. Theoretically, Sandbox would help you avoid that, but I'm guessing there's still easy mistakes you could make. Like, for example, if I make a change to an automation that says, trigger when this box is checked, and that automation is on, I already have records that have that box checked. Because the automation's already on and the boxes were already checked, it's not going to trigger on those when I make this change because they were already checked. But if you're publishing that change now, like, are there any gotchas around that? I lost track of what I'm trying to articulate.
Yes, and I'm glad you brought it up because what I've just done, I was trying to follow along as you sort of said. I have a checkbox, right? Yeah. That checkbox does not yet exist in production. I'm going to say when record matches conditions, grid view, and the condition is done equals yes. And what it should do is send an email. You'll notice an immediate change into what is, the automation panel looks like, and I'll explain that in a moment. But what I'm about to do is make an email automation that runs when the checkbox is checked. You have to be very careful about how you publish these changes. Yeah. Now, if this field already existed in production, that's when you have to be careful. Right now, I don't have to be careful necessarily, because I'm saying when it's checked, and when I publish this change of create this field in production, none of them are going to be checked. But if it was already checked and you publish the automation, I forget exactly what combination I did, but the publishing of the automation and whatever, like the trigger I was looking for at the same time, sent all of the emails. I wish I could remember the exact steps that I followed that caused that to happen, but it's like if I did it the other way around, and maybe this is more obvious, when done is not checked, if I publish these at the same time, all of the records in production are going to be not checked. That is them meeting the condition. So right. What you would want to do is publish the field first.
Yes.
And then publish the automation. Or what you could do is you could publish this automation off and then turn it on and then publish it. Then it won't trigger. But it's a good point that you've brought up, that there's a order of operations, and I wish I could give you a little bit more specifics as to what that order should be.
Well, I think it's like if you're publishing the automation on, it's like there's a difference between having a field that exists in a stale state and like adding new and having the automation on at the same time.
Yes.
That was not at all articulated at all. It's so hard to explain this, but yes, I'm glad you're understanding what I'm trying to get at. The order matters. And if you did it both at the same time, it's going to think those are records that have newly met the condition.
Yeah.
Okay. Good to know.
We're back in the automation panel. And what I wanted to show is, depending on what actions you have in your automation, it's going to automatically behave a little bit differently. As soon as I added a send an email step, and I'll get rid of it and it'll immediately go away, I can add a create record, things are normal, update record, things are normal. It's sending emails and scripts that will give you this language up at the top that never goes away, and the toggle at the kind of top of the automation that says skip actions in Sandbox. The reason why they put that here is because if I had like a daily digest email that's supposed to go out to my stakeholders, I don't want to annoy them about Sandbox data. It's not real. And it often at times the data is wrong on purpose to test for things. So in Airtable's mind, they want you to be able to say, this automation should be on when I publish it, but I don't want to actually send the emails in Sandbox. For scripts, it's a little bit different. I think the reason why they have that same behavior when you add a script to an automation is because what if you're calling an API of some kind? Well, you don't necessarily want to be calling a production API from Sandbox. Like, imagine it's like, bill my customers in Stripe. I don't want to bill them twice, once in production and one in Sandbox. So from their perspective, it's like, well, you might want to turn this off. What is a little bit I don't like necessarily about this implementation is that I can't really say, send this email, but not that email. All emails get skipped or all scripts get skipped. So I'm going to go really quickly and just do that. I'm going to get rid of this because I don't need it. And I'm going to speed through this. .com. Test. So this is a valid email that, let's just say, should go out in production. I can turn off the skip behavior so it behaves exactly how you expect in production and turn this on. And if I click this checkbox, I should see a task record get created. Oh, wait, no, because I flipped the condition.
Oh, yeah.
Whoops. So, blah, 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 blah. Now I flipped it. A new test record was created. I'm listening for my email notification. I got it. Now I want to go in and skip actions in Sandbox. There's no update automation after doing that. Like, it didn't say, oh, update or publish or anything. You just directly toggle. If I go back and I do this again, it doesn't create that test record. So even though the change that I'm trying to necessarily avoid in Sandbox is sending the email, all of the actions get skipped, which is not necessarily what I would want. Personally, I would prefer if each individual action, I was able to say, skip this in Sandbox. Yeah. But instead, it's like, well, the automation's on and it's not going to do anything. Interesting.
That is quite interesting.
Does that error message go away when you toggle it off? Or
no, of course not, Dan. Why would it go away? Actions will be skipped even if you have the thing turned off. I've reported this before, and it's still here.
Because for me, reading that, I thought it just referred to the email so that it would do everything else except the email, or you could say don't do anything by toggling it.
Yeah, that would be logical.
Yeah.
It's not what happens. So everything I've just sort of shown for email is the same for if you had a script instead of a send email. I will say that like the alternative to skipping actions as Sandbox is, depending on what you're doing and how you're pulling in the emails, maybe you could have it pull from Sandbox data. So like maybe in production, all of these people are real people and these are real email addresses, but in Sandbox, I clear out it and it's just my name over and over in my email. And if I'm pulling from this table, then I can be safe in having the send email action turned on and not skipped in Sandbox, because I know it's not going to email real people. It's only going to be emailing basically me. But that's a cleanup step that you just need to remember to do. When you create the Sandbox, it's going to copy your real attendees. So you want to go in and you want to delete them and replace them with yourself, basically.
Yeah. Gotcha.
If you had a production base that, is pretty complex and whatnot, like, is there any risk of turning a Sandbox on that production base?
Not necessarily. I mean, if you have a lot of people, like I work as part of like an Airtable development team. So sometimes more than one person is modifying a base at a given time. That can get really confusing, and you can kind of lock yourself into saying, well, if we both have to edit the same automation, I have to wait for Jan to be done before I can start making my changes because they're going to start conflicting, things like that. That tends to come with the territory of having a complex base. But if you had a bunch of tables, a lot of records, if you had multi-source synced, as long as you're not trying to add another source, you're relatively fine. And something that's not necessarily communicated, it's set up at the top. Every time you push changes from Sandbox to production, it does take a snapshot beforehand. So just in case something goes terribly wrong, there is a snapshot taken. And like I said before, if you start making changes and you're like, whatever I just did broke something, I don't know how to fix it, I don't know how to go back, you could just delete the Sandbox and start over. So you have a layer of protection. It's not necessarily going to hinder you, but there are specific things about how Sandbox works that makes it like maybe you're not gaining much by having it turned on in the first place. Right. This is something I would recommend for like, I need to test form submissions. I need to test a sweeping major change to the underlying schema. I have to delete a whole table. Those are the things that I would recommend turning a Sandbox on for, so you're not immediately bricking the base. But if you're going in and you're renaming stuff, if you're just trying to update a filter, Sandbox is going to deeply irritate you.
Yeah. I mean, one approach I thought of is, even if you just take a sandbox of your production base and then implement something to see if it works, and then don't publish it back, just turn off the sandbox and then recreate those changes, like that might be a middle ground.
Yeah, you could do that. That's a good way of like testing. And another thing, which again is not super obvious, the people who are invited to the base or specific interfaces do not necessarily match the people invited to the Sandbox or the Sandbox versions of those interfaces. Similarly, if I publish a form, the Sandbox and the published version of the form are going to have two different share settings unless you set them to be the same. That is important when it comes to like, if your Sandbox is strictly for testing, I don't want my regular stakeholders in there because then they're going to get confused. They're going to be like, what happened to all my attendees? In the early days of Sandbox, Sandbox would turn gray But nowadays it's the same color as the regular base. So there's not anything that will immediately tell you that you're not looking at the real base unless you look at the top right.
Yeah.
Also, if you're not a creator, I don't think you even see this. So it's like, it's not clear. So the idea of separating things out strictly for testing, it's a good use case for Sandbox, but you just need to remember to re-invite folks back to the wherever they need access to. And 2 more things before I forget. If you have a Sandbox enabled, you cannot move the base into a different workspace. I don't understand why. And the second is, you know how you can go in and say edit table permissions and you could set it to specific users? Mm-hmm. Again, the specific users may or may not have access to both production and Sandbox, but you're editing Sandbox, which means it's only going to let you select people who have access to Sandbox. So if you need to edit these settings, you have to invite the stakeholders to the Sandbox so that you can say they can edit it in prod.
All right.
Very cool. Awesome. Deep dive into Sandboxes. I've got more questions, but we're up on our hour, and that's awesome. Thank you, Camille.
Mm-hmm. That's really great.
Yeah. I'm debating if I want to start using Sandboxes or not. It's a little scary.
I use them. I find them helpful, but it's every single time I'm like, why? There's a specific thing that I run into every single time, and I'm like, I wouldn't have done it this way.
Yeah. Awesome. Cool. Thank you for that. And we will be back next week. Everybody have a great week. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining today's episode. We hope you enjoyed it. Be sure to check out our sponsor, OntoAir Backups, automated backups for Airtable. We'll see you next time on the BuiltOnAir podcast.